So, our mind can be our best friend or our worst enemy. And also we deal with our mind from morning till evening. So you can imagine that if we were able to somehow change a little bit the way we translate outer circumstances in happiness or misery, that would really change what we call our world, which is the world we perceive. There's no other world than the one we perceive. So in that sense, the idea of not just putting all our hopes and fears outside ourselves, in the outer conditions, which is a kind of trying to win the lottery, because our control of the outer circumstances and conditions is very limited, is also always changing. And on top of that, it's often illusory. At least with our mind, then we can start to distinguish which conditions are going to favor flourishing, compassion, inner peace, inner freedom, inner strength, and try to enhance those qualities. And we also can recognize which are the mental states that will undermine this kind of flourishing, that will cause us to feel more ill-being, and also to act and speak in ways that are detrimental to the other's happiness. So then, slowly, emotion after emotion, day after day, we can sort of continuously have this in mind and try to enhance certain mental state and let the others gradually erode and stop to be part of our way of being. So now, often also we vastly underestimate the power of transformation of mind. Of course, when we look at our mind, it looks like a restless monkey. And so it's a monkey that is tied with a lot of strings, and even we want to free that monkey, it jumps so much all the time that we can't even manage to undo the knots. So then, of course, it's not a matter of banging the monkey on the head, but try to tame the monkey. So that's what's supposed to mindfulness be about, is to try to find a state of mind that is more clear, that is more stable, that is more calm. And so usually when we start to do that, people say, well, I tried, but it seemed there are more thoughts than before. So in fact, it's not that there are more thoughts than before, it's that we became aware of the extent of the catastrophe. Because finally, we realize that thoughts are whirling in our mind from morning till evening, almost non-stop, like this mental chatter. And somehow we are sort of powerless to that. But still, we should not underestimate the power of transforming the mind. And that's the beauty of contemplative science, which Buddhism has been developing for more than 2,500 years, is that yes, with time, with perseverance, it is possible to train one's mind in developing those skills of focused attention, of open presence that sees phenomena as they are, of loving kindness, of compassion, and so forth. So then, in a way, when we came to meet with those great scientists, when I met Francisco Varela a very long time ago, when he came to see my teachers, and then in 2000 when I began to participate in the Mind and Life meetings. And then I volunteered I very gratefully accepted the kind invitation of Richie to come to his lab. And when he put me in a scanner, the first good news, he said, you have a brain. I was not quite sure until then. Because, you can't feel your brain. You can pinch your hand, but you cannot pinch your brain. But then we also start experimenting with different kinds of meditation. Because meditation is a very vague, sort of generic term, like mind training, training the mind, or familiarizing yourselves with a new way of being. The word bhavana in Sanskrit means to cultivate. The word gom in Tibetan means to become more familiar with something. So you could cultivate compassion, you could become more familiar with more resilience, more familiar with the way your mind works, with the nature of mind, which is behind the screen of the wandering thoughts. So all that is part of mind training. So we did try many kinds of such mind training and meditation, like focused attention, compassion, and so forth. And as expected, the scientists found that there is a specific brain signature for each of those mental states, which is not surprising because there are in fact very different mental activities. So I just want to give you another example. After going many times to Richie's lab, I also began to collaborate with a German neuroscientist called Tanja Singer, who is one of the world's specialists on empathy. I know nowadays you read the word empathy everywhere, and people use empathy sometimes for compassion, for altruism, for kindness, for care. It seems that empathy is everywhere. But in fact, according to psychologists and neuroscientists, it's a very specific term that has to do with affective resonance. When you see someone with a big smile, then you resonate with that and somehow you feel joyful. If you see someone who suffers, if you are empathic, then you suffer because of this person's suffering. And your suffering is real, that was shown in the brain. The areas of the brain which are activated are actually the one that relate to suffering and distress. So, imagine you are a caregiver, and some of you must be caregivers, nurse, doctors, patients. Unless it's very exceptional case of people who have intense suffering for a long time, but most of the time, either they cure or they die. So they don't remain in that suffering for so long. But imagine you are a caregiver, and day after day, you suffer by resonating with others, with your patient's suffering. And so you can imagine that after a certain time, this is overwhelming. If that's all what you have to deal with that, it becomes too much. So that leads to burnout. And it turns out that according to one study, about 60% of caregivers in the United States have suffered or will suffer of burnout during their career. So what usually those caregivers are being advised is you should somehow create an emotional distance between you and your patient. But as you can imagine, this is not an ideal situation because you should be caring, not sort of distant and aloof, because you could become cold, you could become almost cynical and towards the suffering of others and not provide the necessary care. So is there another way? So when I was collaborating with Tanja Singer and spent many hours over several days in the MRI scanner, in the beginning she asked me just to do empathy. And I was doing what I normally do is to try to generate as best as I could some loving kindness. And after a certain time, because it was a kind of MRI that you could measure, you would see in real time what's going on in the brain. She said, but what are you doing? This is not what we see normally in the brain when people empathize with others' suffering. So she took me out of the scanner and she said, let's talk. And then we discussed. And I explained that I was trying to generate this very warm feeling of love, which when alerted by empathy tells you, oh, that person suffers, then that unconditional love becomes compassion. So it's catalyzed by empathy to become compassion, which is the wish, may the person's suffering and the causes of suffering be removed. Very strong desire, and of course, if you can, followed by action. So then I went back in MRI machine and she said, can you just do empathy for a while? Forget about this compassion. So I had seen a very tragic documentary on the BBC about Romanian children in a foster care, very miserable, so sad. So I visualized that intensely, again and again, for over an hour, alternating periods of neutral state and compassion state. An empathy state, just empathy. And very quickly, it did become unbearable. I had a burnout within 1 hour, not a few years of practice. It was too much, it was overwhelming. I didn't know what to do in my mind, thinking of those children. I could not touch them because they were so fragile and so much suffering. There was kind of distress. So then finally, Tanya said, okay, now you can do your compassion study. So what a relief. It was like, I have these few images in my mind to describe that. It's like a dam that is breaking open, and sort of a river of compassion flowing toward those suffering children. It's like I had this image of every atom of their suffering being now filled and soaked and pervaded by atom of loving kindness. And in my mind, it was a complete change. Instead of this distress, it was a sense of courage, of embracing, like a mother who, even the child is wounded, would take the child in her arm and just completely filled with love for that child, may be cured, may be safe, may flourish, and it's a very constructive mental state. And it turns out that in the brain, those are two very different networks. So that gives a very strong indication that, for instance, in medical study, when you train nurses, when you train caregivers and doctors, it is a must to try to teach this compassion, this care, this sense of warmth. And I met quite a few nurses who say, when I take care of my patient and I try to help them, I feel a great joy. But I don't dare to tell to my colleagues because they think it's strange that I feel love, I feel some kind of joy when I help my patients. But in fact, that is the answer. So now, Tanya Singer is doing a 1-year longitudinal study at the Max Planck Institute of Leipzig with 400 volunteers. 200 will do these different kinds of training, empathy, compassion, loving kindness, and 200 will do some other kind of mental training that has nothing to do with compassion. And the hope, and already the preliminary results show that there's a big difference. So that could be a major contribution to the care work. So just to come back to some images, that's what you would feel, empathy for this person who has a bone TB, she's a widow with a small girl in the normal area of Tibet. So of course you feel that very strongly. Unfortunately, we could save her life by bringing doctors. But you could also have a joy to care for, like this person who lost both his legs when he was 5 years old, and now is caring for his elderly patient with such a joy. Or like these these two nurses in our palliative care unit in one of the clinics that we built in Nepal. There's a sense of care, of warmth, like a mother for the child. Or like this doctor who is holding the hand of that patient. And that this feeling that we always have to console others when they are in grief, and it's not limited to human beings, by the way. And also the sense of cooperation that comes from that care for others. And also how important our social bonds with others are in our life. An OCD study about the factors that contribute most to happiness, number one was the quality of relationship, and not only limited to humans, by the way. So these centenaries in Japan who are together from birth to death. So anyway, high social support, which is based upon care, is better for mental health, for longevity, immunity, less substance abuse, etc., etc. So when we started to practice with Rishi, this shows that disciples of this great master, like here, Khyentse Rinpoche, came to the